EAST-COMM virtual convention. And first, to get things started, we're very excited about the three panelists we have joining us here this afternoon. But first, I'm going to turn over to one of our sponsors, Robbie Lightfoot with Box Out Sports, and he's going to tell you more about Box Out. Robbie, it's all you.
Hey guys, I appreciate that very much. As many of you guys know what Box Out is and what we do, but I wanted to just, for those that you don't, I'm going to share my screen here really quick before we hop into it. And one of the biggest things that we try to do is we try to really help you guys balance the work and life balance, and by creating a solution that makes it look like you have teams of graphic designers working for you. But in reality, it's just maybe you from a cell phone. And the best thing about Box Out is that with any of our subscriptions that you have, we give you guys unlimited users and team pages. So that way you guys can do what we call delegate and conquer. So whatever we can do to kind of make sure that the workload is kind of a little bit maybe onto the assistant coaches or to the coaching staffs, we try to give that opportunity. So that way you guys can delegate and conquer. I was a sports information director for 7 years, and I knew more and more things just get piled on with you guys, and it just seems like sports information just seems to fall in their lap. So with graphics, it's no exception. So we always keep asking ourselves the question of how can we make your guys' life easier? And what we try to do is we try to develop tools and resources and features to make that a lot easier. So for those that don't know Box Out, we've developed some really cool features and things that you can really use to highlight your teams and student athletes in a first-class way. One of the biggest things that we've recently launched is the ability to do what we call multi-format graphics. So I know a lot of people are trying to do when they're trying to post-game, trying to create a graphic that makes it easy for them to post maybe one to Instagram and one to Twitter and one to Facebook. We've developed some pretty cool tools where you can actually create 3 graphics in one. So what you can actually do is I'm sharing my screen here so you guys can hopefully see all that, but really you can change all these features on the left-hand side. And the cool thing about it is once you're done, you can share all 3 of those instantly to Instagram, to Twitter, and to Facebook. So when you're come over here and I'll just change a graphic, you can just simply choose a different photo, whatever the case may be, and then you can even crop that photo. But then when you want, you can actually click update preview and it'll actually spit it out in landscape and square and story size. So that way, when you're ready to go, you can simply click on share. And then the cool thing about this is that you can actually post it to Instagram, you can post this to Twitter, and you can actually choose which one goes where. So if you want to post a single one to Twitter or Instagram, you guys have that ability. So again, it's just one of those things that we're trying to always come up with solutions and easy things for you guys to highlight your guys' teams and student athletes in a first-class way. The other thing that we always try to pride ourselves in is making sure that we can come up with other solutions that may be a little bit easier, such as you guys have maybe seen what I call Instagram slider graphics. So what this is, it just spits it out in 3 different panels. And then when you upload it into Instagram, it looks like one cohesive graphic. It makes it really, really cool for you guys to highlight games and score updates and things like this. So as you slide your finger to the next, it kind of shows a stat breakdown. Then you can slide it again to show a graphic. So those are normally really, really difficult to create in Photoshop. And so our team created those so you guys can use that resource and really interact in a kind of a completely different way with your guys' fans and followers. The other biggest thing that we always try to do is we try to create resources such as our opponent and player database. So rather than you guys having to, sometimes using baseball and softball as an example, you have to get the lineup card from the manager 30 seconds before first pitch. And as you're running upstairs in the press box, probably also doing the scoreboard and live stats, we try to make it easy. So rather than you can actually create your own player database, or then you can simply go on the left-hand side, choose your player, click update preview, and it'll create a really cool animated graphic and place it in the field of where that individual is. So something that would take you a little bit longer to do, we made it so that it's just very, very easy. So those are the things that we're constantly working on, constantly developing and striving to do to kind of make the work-life balance so much easier. So that way you guys can post graphics and move on to the same thing. So we do a lot of really cool things from paper tear things and different features, and we try to stay ahead of design trends. Our graphic designers are also part of teams with the University of Notre Dame. So we try to create content throughout the course of the year and then utilize it. This is our 8th year now doing Box Out. So if you guys are interested, we can easily give you a 14-day free trial. You guys can take a look at that at boxoutsports.com, or you can just email me. It's just Robbie, ROBBIE, at boxoutsports.com. But I know all of you guys aren't here just to hear me, so I just want to let you know that we're here for you whenever you guys need us. And for now, I'll just turn it back to Joe, and then we can continue on with the program. So thanks so much for your time. We're again really proud to sponsor with EAST-COMM and everything you guys are doing again. So if there's anything else we can do, feel free to email me or reach out. So thanks again, guys.
Thanks so much, Robbie. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us today about Box Out Sports. If you just wanted to maybe put your email address in the chat so people can reach out to you here if they have some questions about Box Out or interested in joining the feature for their respective schools. And now with that, we'll get started here with our crisis communications panel. And my name is Joe Fitzhenry. I'm the assistant SID at University of Scranton, and I'll now introduce our three panelists that we have here today. Excited to have all three of them join us this afternoon. First, we'll have Dave Martin, who's the Executive Director of Athletics here at the University of Scranton. And Dave, before coming to Scranton, was a longtime athletic director at Misericordia as well. And he'll be sharing his thoughts this afternoon, along with Katie Boldvich, who's the Landmark Conference Commissioner. Katie's entering her third year as the Landmark Conference Commissioner, as also serves as the commissioner of a couple of single sport conferences as well, with the Eastern Collegiate Football Conference and the New England Hockey Conference. And lastly, but certainly not least, is Janice Luck, who's the co-director of athletics and also the head women's basketball coach at Albright College. Janice is entering her 20th season as the head coach at Albright and also has been the co-director of athletics for over a decade for the Lions as well. And with that, I will turn it over to Dave Martin, who's going to lead us off today with some general thoughts on crisis communications.
Thanks, Joe. And I'd also like to thank Sean Medeiros and EAST-COMM for having me. It's great to see a lot of familiar faces on the screen, and I applaud all of you. You know, we're in the middle of June, and you're all sitting here trying to improve yourselves, looking to take steps forward with your careers, and I appreciate that. My only hope, Joe, and you can pass this on to Sean, next year when you meet in person in Newport, Rhode Island, I hope I get the same offer to be on a panel again so that we can go someplace nice and not have to deal with the Zoom. But
absolutely, Dave.
Just some basic information, some basic thoughts that I have to share with you as it relates to crisis management communication. I think there are two prongs to every crisis. One is actually managing the crisis, and then the second prong would be the communication around the crisis. I think it's really important to follow all of your rules and procedures that you have in place in terms of managing the crisis. It's really important that you stay consistent and that you do the right thing and don't do things differently or don't deviate from the protocols that you have in place. I think if the crisis is dealt with in an appropriate manner, it certainly makes the communication a lot easier. In terms of the communication around the crisis, you know, there's a lot involved with that. Engaging the appropriate people at the appropriate level, who needs to know and in what way, and when the time frame with that. It's important to recognize that there are differences in who needs to know what and when they need to know it. For example, you know, your staff and coaches should know what's happening before you share information with the media or the general public. And that message that we would deliver to our coaches and staff would certainly be said differently than what we would do with a public release. Crisis is an interesting thing. You know, people get attracted to the shiny thing. You know, the press conference or whatever it might be. But really, the basic thing that is key to all of this is, did you deal with the issue at hand? If your administration or the athletics department or whatever the case may be, if they dealt with the issue at hand and they were solid in terms of sticking with their protocols and following their processes, the rest of it should fall into place. Some additional thoughts around this. I think it's really important that you have a solid crisis communication plan in place. You obviously can't plan for every situation or every scenario, but knowing how you will approach it certainly gives you a head start if you have to deal with an issue. I think one of the things that you need to do in that planning is break it down into groups that you must communicate with. Here at Scranton, for example, we utilize a variety of tools to communicate with students, faculty, staff, and other constituencies. Depending on the scope and the nature of the crisis, these tools could include utilizing, we have an emergency notification system, if you will. And in that, we have the ability to voice call, text message, email to all students, faculty, and staff. We also have multiple, we call them royal lists here, but basically just listservs where we can broadcast targeted emails to all of the constituencies that I just mentioned, as well as alumni, parents, and so forth. I think one of the things that is really important, and my guess is most of your institutions, if not all, already have this, you need a crisis management team. Here on our campus, it's called an incident management team. But if you don't take anything else away from our time together today, I can't emphasize enough the fact that this is a partnership. You're not out on an island by yourself in terms of having to communicate what's going on. It's a partnership, and athletics should never act independently from the university during a time of crisis. Our incident management team here at the university, we've got our Vice President of External Affairs, Vice President of Student Life, Provost, VP of Human Resources, Lead General Counsel, just to name a few of the folks. And then others would be added depending on the area that the crisis took place in. For example, my first year here at Scranton, we had a pretty ugly hazing situation. And myself and our athletics communication manager at the time, Randy Szymanski, were brought in to join the team to work through the details of how we got through that hazing incident and how we would communicate with everyone else in the outside world, if you will. I think it's important that you coordinate your efforts with folks on your campus. Here we work in partnership with community and media relations. With that said, everything, I think one of the keys to crisis communication, everything should be funneled through one person. There should be one spokesperson for the university, one voice speaking to the media. Again, here at Scranton, our Director of Media Relations, Stan Zygmunt, it would be the lightning rod for any issues that we would have. And again, I think that's important. You know, you're going to be working with others on your campus. It may be university police, it may be student conduct, it may even be the NCAA. So it's really vital to have that one point of contact. In our world of athletics, as many of you know, and a lot of you being athletics communication managers, sports information directors, coaches have friends, and our coaches, media have access to our coaches. I think it's imperative that when dealing with a crisis that we put familiarity aside during the crisis. You know, things can get twisted very quickly and very easily. You know, we, having been a coach, I get it. You know, as coaches, we think, oh, he's my buddy, or you know, he's our beat writer. He covers us all the time. He wouldn't say anything to make the university look bad. You've got to be really careful. And I think the message has to go out to your entire staff that, you know, this isn't something that we're going to talk about publicly. This is our point of contact. If anybody reaches out to you, you direct them to that person and not get caught up in the little asides or the sidebar conversations. It only takes one tweet to magnify the situation, and oftentimes it ends up intensifying the issue. Another thing, and again, this is, you all have a better handle on this than I ever would, but in this day and age of social media, obviously during any crisis, any situation, someone should be monitoring social media. You guys know better than I the way to track this, but whether we like it or not, we need to be aware of what's being said in social media, and we need to be ready to respond if necessary. Best piece of advice that I can give all of you is stay calm. You've got to be patient, and you can't take things personally. And that's easier said than done. Having just gone through a pandemic, my life, I'll be honest with you, not because she's on the call, my lifeline during the pandemic was Katie. Katie Boldvich is our commissioner, and we were the last school, or we were one of the few schools that did not allow spectators at our events in the spring, and we had a great spring, and our baseball team ended up winning a conference championship. Everyone else is allowing spectators at their baseball games. Here we are hosting the conference championship final, and we're not allowing fans. And it can be brutal. And parents, look, the reality of it is parents can be brutal. But it's really important that we not take things personally. Everyone's going to process a crisis differently. One of my favorite sayings, I'm a big quote guy for those of you that have known me for a while, we see things as we are, not always as they are. And truth of the matter, parents can be brutal, but they're invested. They're going to process it differently than we are. They're going to process things differently than even their students do. So be patient. Don't take it personally. Stay with your message, and stick to the facts. We actually have a template or some guidelines here at the university that we have to follow, and I was just briefly going to share those with you. I think there's some good information in here in terms of dealing with crisis and communicating through it. Display concern and dedication to resolve the crisis. Establish and maintain credibility by providing factual information in an organized message. Release verified information in a timely manner. We all know that if the media doesn't get the information from the university quickly, they're going to go to another source, and then the information may not be accurate. If an answer is not available, make that part of the message in your early response, and then search for the information in earnest. Maintain equal access to information for all students and their families, as well as the media. I think that's very important. Communicate technical details clearly. Stay positive, but be realistic. And that can be challenging sometimes. Again, working through the pandemic, that was one of the most difficult challenges. We want to stay positive and continue to give our student athletes hope that at some point we were going to play, but we wanted to be realistic and not lead them on if we didn't think that was going to happen. Never speculate. That only takes you down a rabbit hole that you don't want to go down. And in no uncertain circumstance, do not discuss undetermined issues. Again, it can take you off on tangents that are just going to lead to no good. And then again, finally, just maintain a consistent message across university departments. I can't emphasize enough that it's a partnership, and even though it's an issue in athletics, you need to make sure that the university is involved, and you have folks on campus that can help you work through that. I guess in closing, I would hope that none of you ever have to deal with a crisis or be put into the position of managing or communicating through a crisis. However, the reality of it is, a lot of what we do, we're putting our lives in the hands of 18 to 22-year-old young adults who don't always make the best choices. So the reality of it is, at some point in your career, you're going to have to grapple with this challenge. But I think the important thing is to know that you're not alone. Be honest, be direct, and be patient. But again, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you all today. And I guess we'll take questions later, right, Joe?
Yeah, we'll take some questions later. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate you leading us off. And now I'll kind of lead into Katie Boldvich. Dave kind of created the natural transition there with Katie in her role as the Landmark Conference Commissioner, and Katie, not to necessarily focus this whole thing on COVID-19, but what was the process like over the last year or so, really, from the time canceling fall sports last summer to finally getting us back to play nearly every sport this spring?
Yeah, it was a challenge. And I think everybody on this call right now knows what a challenge that was for institutions and conference as a whole. From a conference office perspective, I think it was a bit unique because you're dealing with multiple constituent groups making those decisions and then trying to trickle down appropriately. I think Dave touched on that really well too, regarding like process of information and when certain individuals need access to information as opposed to others. So obviously for our processes, as every conference office, I'd assume our presidents were the ones really making those decisions and meeting regularly regarding the status of sports. And then I just tried to be mindful in my role to make sure that the athletic directors had a meeting scheduled immediately following those presidents' meetings, so we could talk about the message, the communication, and what they needed to be sharing with their staff as well. Athletic trainers were also really heavily involved in that too. So for me with these kinds of things, it's there's no handbook, right? I think we all use that a million times during COVID, but I try to ask myself several questions before deciding on next steps and messaging. So from a timing perspective, one of the big things I do, and this is for everything, crisis comm, even responding to an email, something that simple, is this something that's urgent? So I need to get this news out immediately because someone else may have access to this information and I don't want the incorrect message getting across. Is this critical? Do I need to take more time and be thoughtful with this message and make sure it says exactly what I need it to say? And then of course, the perfect storm is this urgent and critical? Sometimes those designations are very fluid. So when we made the decision to cancel fall sports, on the surface, I think everyone here would agree that's probably both critical and urgent because we wanted to ensure all of the constituents were informed. But due to the unique timing of our message, it actually wasn't truly urgent. That's not saying the news wasn't important, but we were one of the last conferences in the country to cancel fall sports. So we chose to take a little additional time and really think through our press release and messaging prior to making that announcement. And I think that was a priority for our conference, just to make sure our communication reflected the thoroughness of that decision, and how long we waited to come to that decision. I'm trying to think. I think the other big thing, Dave touched on it a bit with social media too. So I'll hop on that. I think it needs to be really methodical about presidents making the decision and then informing the ADs immediately after. I think we were mindful and transparent about trying to keep our message off social media because we wanted the ADs to have the time to communicate that message directly to their coaches. The coaches would way rather hear from Dave, I'm sorry, we're not playing soccer this year, than it being a random landmark website announcement or having something pop up on Twitter. And then off of that, a coach should have the opportunity to share that news with their team. Again, not have something on Twitter where a team captain or someone like that just happens to catch something at the right time and now it blows up, and not be able to be shared thoughtfully. So I think that was a priority for us as well. And I'm pretty proud with how we were able to do that as a group. And I think our coaches were appreciative of having time to speak with their teams individually. And I think our SIDs were pretty thankful to have time to craft their own institutional message and also ensure that was distributed to alumni, families, and more.
Thanks, Katie. Appreciate your thoughts there. And I want to touch on something that Katie said about kind of giving coaches the ability to kind of relay that message to their team. And Janice, as a women's basketball coach at Albright, I mean, obviously you guys were able to have somewhat of a shortened season, but what was the challenge like kind of trying to maintain your team through the whole process, trying to stay positive and thinking that you were hopefully going to have some sort of season?
Yeah, it was really difficult, because athletes are looking to their coaches for answers and direction and just keeping them interested, we practiced in the fall and they're asking, are we going to have games? Are we going to have games? So the biggest challenge was just keeping them on board. And as most of you I'm sure you've heard, retain, you want to retain your student athletes and make sure they come back for the spring semester. So it was definitely a challenge. and keeping them still kind of in our Albright bubble, and social media is part of that bubble. So that it was definitely a big challenge, to go off what was just said about social media. My biggest thing with crisis management communication is planning ahead. And I think the tips that Dave gave that Scranton has, those bullets were excellent. Social media is so big, and I know some of our coaches, that it's beyond them. So they have one of their players, their captains running the page or whatnot. So I think, our sports information office needs to know, what team pages are out there, and, have something set up, what are they named? Are they all similar? Who's running them? Do they have guidelines? Timing of tweeting and retweeting, because that alone could create a crisis, right? It's not necessarily just responding to a crisis, but we can actually create our own by the timing of social media. So, knowing who's running them and who's reviewing them, so if someone's running it, who's in charge of checking daily what's on all of our team social media pages. Someone needs to be doing that, and that has to be part of the process. In addition to planning ahead to crisis, and Dave talked about this a lot, is just collaboration and it's teamwork. So our sports information director sits in monthly with our college communications division on their staff meetings, and it's a chance for him to share what's happening in the athletics and upcoming, what might be happening, in the next month, and for them to share with him any marketing campaigns or things that are happening or crisis that might be approaching. So planning ahead could, make the crisis easier to manage once it's here. I'd also say I'm really proud that I did have, on a lighter note, a 30-day stint as a sports information director. And some of you on this call were there to help me through it. But if you can get through, a 110-degree football day where you had to start the game at 9 a.m., your staff doesn't show up, your ink runs out, and you got ink all over, you don't know how to do the stat crew, then you guys can get through anything. That's how I see it. That is quite some crisis. So I think you can define crisis in so many different ways. It can be something as large as, a student athlete death, which unfortunately we, some of us had to go through, and it's a very hard, trying times, to something as small as, your Wi-Fi going out on game day, and it's really how you define crisis. And for a sports information director or an AD, it may be different. And for a coach, it also may be different. Someone's injured. And, after the game, the press is asking that coach, why, what happened? And you've got to follow HIPAA and FERPA and, all the regulations. So I think that, as a sports information director or communications division, you really need to be open and have that open communication line with all of your coaches, to make sure that you understand what crisis might mean to them so that you can help them through it, and that includes knowing what's going on with their team and what might be happening, because, depending on how your local media is set up, and I think Katie talked about this, who they're going to reach out to. They're going to reach right out to the coach, or are they going to reach out to the sports information director? It's, or they can't, if someone doesn't answer, they call the other person. So I can't, express enough how important it is that the teamwork and collaboration and everyone in the communications is at the heart of it. You have to know everything. It's not an easy job. And for Albright, it's really important that we are informing everyone. So, and that we work really closely with our college communications division. So if we're going to be setting something out, for example, the spectator policy, we were allowing spectators, and we had to make sure that the college communications knew we were going to be sending that out and posting it. It's a big announcement. So, that's not necessarily a crisis. It's a good crisis, a good and a bad crisis. So that's a good crisis. They're allowed to come, but it's also going to be a crisis for those that have to, manage it on game day. So I think defining crisis is really is something that you could look at differently, whether it's an AD, yourselves, or a coach. And losing a big game is a crisis in a coach's world. So it's all different things to all different people. Some other things that might be big for a coach, a player has a violation of team rules, and you've heard that in the media, right? That could mean anything under the sun. But making sure that our coaches and players know how to talk to media, you know, and some media training. You know, maybe it is just for head coaches, and the head coaches can have some guidelines for their players that are going to be in front of the camera and talking to the media, especially prior to some you know, postseason tournaments where there's mandatory media after the games. They need a little training to know what to say and what they can share. You know, what happened to Susie? Oh, she broke her leg. You know, well, that's really a violation. So just different things. I think that if you're really planning ahead, you're not going to avoid crisis, but you're going to make the crisis easier to manage. And like I said, everyone defines it a little bit differently. We've had our fair share here. Everything, I wear many hats. So everything from the ink exploding when I was a short-lived SID to a coach where players transferring out, and you know, to an AD where, you know, we've had you know, tragic events with our student athletes, or you know, a lot of discussion and talk around things that happen around the national anthem. So really big things do happen in all levels. And I think that communication's at the heart of all of it. You need to know everything all the time. So it's very critical that you have open communications with everyone.
Thanks so much, Janice. Appreciate your insights there. And one of the things that Janice touched on I found interesting was, in this day and age of social media, where everything is so pertinent, we live so much on social media and on our phones, on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's kind of an open-ended question for any of our three panelists. Is there something over the course of your careers, like a social media incident maybe, that you recall where it kind of turned into a crisis matter? Like Janice said, it can really quickly if you put something not so good on social media.
I mean, I have a billion, but I'll give you one. So it was one of our teams won a game. You know, it wasn't really a crisis. They won a game, and they had a towel around their neck, and they, you know, whipped it up on their head similar to a turban, and posted it on social media and said, you know, I don't remember what the phrase was, but it was really more about the photo. And they were innocent kids on the bus ride home celebrating a win, but it was offensive to people of, you know, that wear different hijabs and things, or head dressing, and it was a huge incident, and it turned into suspending him from the team, and really the kid was just celebrating his game, and it's a very unfortunate thing, and it was a lot of communication and investigating of what they really meant, and talking to the different players on the bus, and then what comes out after that. You know, how do you, what happens after the event, aside from some social media training, you know, what statements might come out from that team's page to address, you know, that apology or some sort of statement. So little things can, you know, especially 18 to 20, or, you know, our jobs are in the hands of 18 to 22-year-olds. So we're always pulling our hair out, but that was an interesting, the one that didn't mean to be a crisis, but turned into one.
Katie or Dave, any thoughts to add there on a social media crisis or something similar?
I don't have an example of a crisis, but I think, as you know, Joe, here at Scranton now, we now have a social media policy. And in every one of our preseason meetings with all of our student athletes, we literally go through the social media policy and talk about do's and don'ts. And at the end of the day, each of our student athletes has to sign off. And we have a copy of the signed agreement, if you will. I mean, that's the level that it's gotten to. And it's unfortunate, but that's the reality. You know, folks are posting things and saying things that they may not find offensive, but certainly a lot of others will. And I think it comes back to the whole idea, the understanding that when you know, you're not just representing yourself. When you put on the Albright Lions jersey or the Scranton Royals, you're representing yourself, your teammates, your team, and your university. And we've really spent a lot of time trying to get our student athletes to understand that. And, you know, some don't like it. They don't want to hear those conversations. And then inevitably I use the Gino Ariema example. You know, when UConn women's basketball is in season, Gino doesn't allow any of them to be on social media. They're not allowed to post. They're not allowed to. And I said, you know, you hate to see it get to that level, but those are the concerns that are out there, and it certainly is something. It's an additional issue that we all have to deal with, but at most of our institutions, it ends up falling in the lap of our sports information folks.
One of the things I noticed a lot this past year weren't even necessarily the posts, but the comments that can come on the posts. And man, that's a different animal all in and of itself. That was a big thing for us that I worked through with our assistant commissioner regarding what comments to leave, closing the comments. If there was something that specifically might be a controversial announcement, is it worth it just to disable comments? Then you get crushed for disabling the comments or deleting things. But now it's, there's so much more than just that singular post or those multiple team accounts to follow, because you now have to look at all the interactions that it's getting as well. And is there anything that's abusive or hostile or anything that you might need to take more seriously too? So I know that was a challenge we had, and we just tried our best to come up with an internal policy for when we would and wouldn't have those open, and took the heat when we needed to.
Thanks, Katie and Dave, for also adding your thoughts there. And then one final question I kind of wanted to add, and Janice, you kind of touched on this as well with, you said a crisis can result in something so small, like it can be an injury, or if a player comes to all playing time. And from a coach's perspective, I mean, obviously you're trying to manage the team best in order how to win, but then how do you handle someone, and Dave, this kind of applies to you as well, how do you handle someone that's upset about their playing time and the role that they have on the team?
Oh, if I had the answer to that, I would be a national champion every year. But I think it starts from the leadership in the athletic office, and what the department is going to stick with, and trickles down to the coaches, and then the messages from the coaches to the players. And as an AD, I do get phone calls still. My kid's not playing, and if you don't play, none of the parents are going to come to the game, and we're going to have a riot and blah, blah, blah. And everyone's on board. And, I think it just has to be, you just have to listen in those crises. They want their voice to be heard. And I actually kill them with kindness is my biggest thing as a coach or an AD. And I listen and I say, thank you so much for calling me today. And that's it. But basically, their son or daughter's over 18, and those discussions are between the player and coach. And, if they're going to, threaten media or whatnot, then I think you have to get certain people involved, if you're the coach, you need to get AD, communications, anyone else at the executive level at the college that might need to be involved, knowing what's happening. I've sat in meetings with a parent and a player who were not happy as an AD, who weren't happy about their playing time. And the dad was a detective. And then other dad was a lawyer, and they're like throwing things at you on their letterhead. And, it's really just about, once again, communication, letting them speak their mind, listen. And if they address a concern that you need to look into, then let them know you're going to look into it, and then look into it. And then thank them for their concern. We all want what's best for our student athletes, and so does the parent. And so that's what I always try to stick to, is just messaging of what you would say anyway in any situation. And it really falls into play with crisis as well, and playing time.
Thanks, Janice. Good answer there. Appreciate you answering that one. Dave or Katie, any thoughts to add there before we get into our Q&A session here?
I have a lot of thoughts about playing time, but Janice said it beautifully. We tell our student athletes that, again, in our preseason meetings, that, I tell them my door's always open. I'm happy to have conversations with our student athletes about anything. But I also tell our student athletes that, I don't want a phone call from mom or dad about your playing time. If a parent has a concern over the way that the student athlete is being treated, or they're not being released from practice to get to the cafeteria on time so they can eat their dinner, I want to know about that. But you can't equate abuse to playing time. And look, our coaches It's college athletics, and I don't care if it's Division 1, 2, or 3. People want to win, and you're going to put the best people on the court or on the floor, in the field, in the pool, to give you the best chance to win. That coach has an opportunity to see that kid a couple hours a day, 6 days a week. And a lot of times, if I do get the call, and even though I tell them I don't want to hear from the parents about playing time, I get the calls. It's amazing. And I get more now than ever. But I tell the parents, have you talked to Janice about her playing time? Maybe you should go back, because a lot of times the student athletes, they know where it's at. They know that they haven't earned the playing time, and it's the parent who is delusional, or the student athlete is not being totally honest with the parent. So that's one of the things that I've tried to do, is go back and talk to your son Joe about his playing time, and see if he, or if Joe feels that he's not being treated fairly, you have him come in and see me, and I'm happy to meet with him and talk with him. It's kind of a double-edged sword. Our student athletes and students in college, they want to be treated as adults, but when things are hard, sometimes they don't want to take on that adult responsibility. So we try to capture the educational moment as much as we can, and I try to put it back on, especially with parents, that have Tommy come and see me. I'm happy to talk to him about it. And probably 90% of the time they don't come in because they know the reality that they shouldn't be playing, or whatever the case may be. You can tell I'm older than both Katie and Janice. I'm a little more old school in my playing time approach.
I'm going to add to that a little bit, the crisis part of it. Something that could set off a crisis on a team or for a coach is a social media post about the probable starters for the night. There was a point where, I asked our sports information director to just not post it that day. Like, please do not post it. I've already talked to the players and it's been a shit show for 24 hours. Like, could you just not post it? So, little things, like I said, for crisis for some people is really different. And, if the game's on the line and I'm playing the 5 best people, like Dave just suggested, it's not going to make everybody happy. And then the post comes out and it's not the 5 that are actually starting. And it could cause a ripple effect of all sorts of stuff. So, that's one thing. But once again, being able for coaches to have that comfortable communication where they can go to their SID or whoever's posting and say, hey, could you skip it this time? Or, I don't think it's great for this sport or this program or whatever it might be. So just another little tidbit.
Thank you, Janice and Dave, for sharing your answers there. Now, everyone, we'll get started with our Q&A session. We did have a question a few minutes ago from Ann King, which I thought was a really good question, and it was pretty relevant here. Over the last few weeks, given what happened with Naomi Osaka in regards to the post-match media obligations or withdrawal from the French Open and the mental health aspect of it as well, how do you go about respecting and understanding when the post-game media obligations might just be too much, especially at the Division III level?
Well, I would say, I think once again, it comes down to preparing, planning, training our coaches. Typically in my coaching situation, the media will come to me. Let's say it's regular season, not postseason. And, can I talk to Gabby and this person? And, I know that I just was in the locker room and she's bawling her eyes out or whatever it might be. You can train your coaches or whoever would be talking to the media or, if the SID comes and asks me, they want to talk to this person, for now, for our athletes, it's not a good time for our athletes right now to speak with you. If you'd like to interview them tomorrow or talk to another coach, you're more than welcome to do that. But right now, for the well-being of our student athletes, we're not going to have any players interviewed at this time. I think you have to have a buffer between the athletes. They're too young and too vulnerable in their emotional state to even be able to go out there. Even if maybe they weren't crying and you didn't notice it, but it was a very emotional game of some sort, or ask for some breathing time, similar to a postseason NCAA game. You can talk to her, but you're gonna have to wait 15 minutes and see if they stick around. Those would be my suggestions.
Katie or Dave, any thoughts to add there about how to kind of handle post-media obligations at this level?
I think Janice nailed it. It's our obligation to nurture our student athletes and to help them grow and to protect them when they need protected. And if mental health is real, and we all know that. And if someone's having a difficult time, we need to be able to step up. Whether it be an athletic administrator, a sports information person, or a coach, we need to be able to step in and gracefully handle that situation and not put our student athlete into that situation.
And that leads us into our next question, actually, from Sean Medeiros. He was kind of wondering, how can the role of an athletic communicator or sports information director, how can they protect not only a coach or an athletic director, but also the student athlete as well? Like, what role can an SID play in trying to protect the student athletes from dealing with the media at times?
Yeah, Joe, I'll jump in on that first. And I think we have this situation here at Scranton. I think you and John Gatto have done a great job with it. I mentioned earlier, there's a familiarity factor with coaches and media. Like we're fortunate. We live in an area where we have local TV stations that cover us. We have highlights on the news, the ABC, NBC, CBS affiliates. We've got newspapers that cover us. I think it's important that the sports information, athletic communications folks set parameters with all of the media outlets. And our guys have done a great job here with that, making sure that if you want to interview one of our student athletes, if you want to interview one of our coaches, if you want to interview Dave Martin, everything has to be funneled through the sports information office. I think it seems simple enough, but a lot of times, media folks will do the end around because they have your cell phone number or you're their buddy, or they think you're their buddy, and our students, again, we're talking about 18, 19, 20-year-olds at times. They don't want to tell people no. They have a chance to be on television or a chance to be interviewed. So sometimes this happens, and they're not prepared to handle the line of questioning or whatever the case may be. So I think one of the things that's vitally important, and we're fortunate here. We have a great sports information staff, but you guys are in charge. You folks are in charge, and make sure that all the media outlets that you deal with understand. If you want to talk to one of our people, we'll make it happen. But you've got to go through us, and then that way, if there's an issue or if there's a potential issue. In our case, John or Joe can reach out to the coach and the student athlete and say, hey, Channel 16 wants to speak with you. Just a heads up that, they're going to want to talk about the no spectator policy. How do you feel about mom and dad not being able to come to the game? So with a little bit of coaching and just a little bit of a heads up, it allows the student athlete to represent themselves and the university in a little better light. So I think that's really important. And I know here at Scranton, and I would say not because of me, but prior to me getting here, there was a lot of end around happening, and it can create some issues. So I think that's a really important role that you all play.
Thanks, Dave. And Katie, what is it like dealing with media from a conference perspective? I mean, this is kind of mostly tied to COVID and with the announcements that have been put out there over the last year, but what was it like trying to handle that from a media perspective if they wanted thoughts from the conference office directly?
Yeah, I usually try to figure out where the media was coming from too. So whether it was regional based or a school newspaper or something like that. So I try and touch base with the AD first and talk it through to say, hey, do you actually want me to handle this? Or would you prefer to give a statement on behalf of Scranton? And I think that worked pretty well. So I always try to talk to my people before giving any kind of statement or reference them to our press release or our FAQ and say, our statements are here. If you have any follow-up questions, let us know. But just being matter of fact and listing actual information and not trying to go down too many rabbit holes. And luckily, some of the institutions saved me at times. I don't envy some of you all with the the media attention, but I think generally that's a good way to go about it.
Thank you, Katie. And we had a question come in here from Derek Dunning, and this is kind of related directly to an NCAA tournament contest. What if one of the student athletes that the media wants really does not want to go, or like Janice touched on earlier, is not, and maybe necessarily the best mental shape to go talk to the media right then and there? Do we think it's okay for the SID to kind of just get them there, or can they just say, hey, no, this person isn't available, and try to give them essentially a plan B?
I think you guys know your people best. I've served on a few committees and I've made that tough ask. I think I actually made that tough ask to Derek a few times at hockey, to have a kid come in and sit on the dais that really didn't want to be there. So it's tough because do they not want to be there because they don't want to talk about the loss, or are they overly emotional and it would be bad to put them in that state for their own mental well-being? It's a fine line. And I think what's tough is a lot of that does fall back on the coaches and SIDs because you know your players best, but you got to stick up for your kids. And if you know that's not a good situation for them, I don't think you should ever feel bad saying, nope, I'm going to give you XYZ instead.
Dave or Janice, any thoughts to add there about how to handle an NCAA tournament loss, most likely in this scenario?
Well, since I've had numerous NCAA losses, I can share my thoughts on that. It is hard, but they do give you the cooling off period if it's coming from the loss perspective, and hopefully your kids can get it together. But there's ones that have just said no to me, and I just bring someone else, and they say, I wanted this person. Well, this is who you got. This is who you're going to get, and it's protecting our student athletes, but it's also it's going to be on YouTube. It's going to be on Twitter. I mean, you can Google all of them now from 10 years ago. So it's got to be a good representation of your college and of your conference. So it's going to be something that's out there. So you want to make sure it's someone that can at least answer questions. So it's not a total mental breakdown or make them feel worse than they already do. So it's a great experience. So if you can, once again, I'm a planner, plan ahead. Before they go into the game, that the players need to know that this is what's going to happen afterwards. That win or lose, you're going to have a media time, and you're going to be asked to talk. So you got to be prepared. So planning ahead.
Thank you, Janice. And then just probably about time for one final question here before we head into our next social media planning panel beginning at 3 p.m. And the final question I wanted to ask here this afternoon is just, you guys have already given tons of great advice to the SIDs we have tuning in here today, but also just any final thoughts or any final piece of advice about how SIDs can best handle a crisis situation moving forward in their careers. What can they take away from this panel?
I think the one common thread that you've probably heard from all three of us is communicate. I think it's really important to understand and realize that you're not on an island by yourself. It doesn't all fall on you. And I think the reality of it is whatever the situation and whatever the resolution to that crisis or issue, it's not your resolution. There are a group of people, whether it be an administration or whatever the case may be, that make these decisions, and we are just communicating them. We're getting the information out there, but don't you have great resources. Just like there's an AD fraternity, and there's a commissioners fraternity, and there's a coaching fraternity. It strikes me that the sports information directors have a close fraternity, and it's a group of folks that support each other. Communicate. Don't be afraid to reach out to others. But I know, or at least I hope here at Scranton, if we're dealing with anything that's tough, I think John and Joe would both be comfortable coming into my office, and we would get the rest of our administrative team, and we would just work through it. You're not alone. And no one has all the answers. So I think communication is absolutely the key to being successful in dealing with any of these types of things.
I couldn't agree more with Dave. like you said, we did all mention that, and that is just, it's crucial in the many hats that I wear, because I go from, sitting on the president's cabinet and athletic administrator to coaching. So I hear it from all different angles. My athletes say things, ask questions, the coaches ask questions, vice presidents are asking questions. So I'm kind of the go-between with a lot of hats, but just to make sure everyone's on the same page. And the timing of announcements is crucial, and could create a crisis when you're not, that wasn't the intention. So, but that being said, like Dave said, it's not your decision, it's not your announcement. However, we couldn't do all of our coaching, commissioner, and AD jobs without you. So it's your critical piece that plays a major role in any crisis.
Yeah, I'll just jump off that. Don't let it take it too personally. Easier said than done. I'm terrible at that. But when you're doing those difficult communications, like Janice said, it's not you personally making that announcement, and try and disconnect as best you can as well, and get some good time with the family, and not dwell on it, especially if you're going through your check marks and you're doing everything the way you're supposed to do, and getting the proper groups informed when they need to be informed.
Thanks everyone for sharing their insight there. Dave, Janice, and Katie, thanks so much for joining us here this afternoon and sharing your very broad experiences and insights over the course of your career with this SIG group. Really appreciate you guys taking the time to join us this afternoon. Hopefully everyone was able to pick up a few things from this very great group of panelists that we were able to put together this afternoon. And then want to encourage everyone to tune into our social media planning panel here at 3 p.m. this afternoon, coming up in just a couple minutes. Again, one final thank you to all of our panelists, Dave Martin, Janice Luck, and Katie Boldvich, and also a big thank you to Sean Medeiros, Emily Machado, and our planning committee, as well with EAST-COMM, for helping all of us put together these this convention for us over the next couple days as well. Thanks everyone. Have a great rest of your afternoon. Enjoy the rest of the convention as well.
Thanks, Joe. Everyone enjoy the rest of the workshop.